Evelyn Hart and Marcus Hale were destined to inherit the same empire, but only one of them would survive the battle for power. When Evelyn vanished without a trace, the world believed it was a kidnapping. No one imagined that the quiet man working in the shadows of the Hart Empire had been watching her for months, preparing a plan that would end in a cold, calculated murder. Their connection was written in blood, ambition, and betrayal, proving that the deadliest threats don't come from strangers, but from the people who believe they deserve your life more than you do. Evelyn Hart's final morning began like any other, yet every detail of it would later feel heavy with meaning. She woke early, as she always did, keeping to a disciplined routine shaped by years of preparing to inherit her family's empire. The Hart mansion, usually filled with soft light and quiet luxury, seemed unusually still that day. Her personal assistant later recalled receiving a series of scheduled notifications, reminders for meetings, calls, and a charity briefing Evelyn had been planning for months. All of them remained unread, as if time in Evelyn's world had suddenly stopped. Her last known movements were pieced together through security footage around the house. She walked through the kitchen with a folder of documents under her arm, paused briefly near the window, and then moved toward her home office. Nothing appeared strange or hurried. She looked calm, focused, and unaware of the danger waiting for her. The footage ended when she entered the office, and from that moment, no trace of her leaving existed. Investigators found this detail deeply unsettling because her estate was equipped with top-tier surveillance. The missing segment suggested a level of planning only someone familiar with the property could execute. Inside the home office, police found an unfinished cup of coffee beside an open laptop. Her workspace was neat, almost untouched, as if she had been pulled away before settling in. Papers related to a new sustainable materials project were scattered across the desk, an unusual sight since Evelyn was known for keeping her work organized. Forensic teams detected faint mud traces on the floor, stretching from the entrance to the living room. The mud wasn't from her shoes, and the pattern suggested someone had stood in that space for several minutes. That single line of evidence turned the entire scene from a potential disappearance into a likely abduction. Outside the house, investigators searched for signs of forced entry but found nothing. The doors were locked, the alarm system set, and the windows sealed. The calm exterior only deepened the mystery. Investigators began to suspect that whoever entered the house knew how to avoid triggering the alarms. This suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the system, perhaps an employee, contractor, or someone who had spent time on the property before. Neighbors were questioned throughout the afternoon. A few remembered seeing a dark vehicle parked on the street before sunrise, a detail they initially ignored because luxury cars often passed through the neighborhood. Another neighbor mentioned hearing a brief thud around the same time Evelyn disappeared, but the sound was dismissed as routine construction nearby. These fragments, though small, formed the earliest pieces of a growing puzzle pointing toward a silent intruder who acted quickly and confidently. As hours passed, urgency spread across the Hart Empire. Executives attempted to reach her repeatedly, meeting rooms filled with worried whispers. Her assistant made dozens of calls before contacting the police. Even her father, a man known for calm leadership, reportedly showed signs of distress when he learned she had missed an important board meeting. Evelyn had never missed one. By nightfall, the mansion became a maze of flashing lights and quiet footsteps as investigators combed every corner. Each hour without answers tightened the atmosphere around the estate. It was clear that Evelyn Hart had not simply vanished. Someone had entered her world, removed her from it, and left without a single witness. The day that began like any other had become the start of a tragedy that would shake an entire empire. As investigators pushed deeper into Evelyn Hart's personal and professional life, they uncovered a hidden layer of tension that had been growing inside the Hart Empire long before her disappearance. She had been preparing major changes that threatened long-standing traditions within the company. Her plans included global expansion, digitalizing operations, and shifting the entire brand toward environmentally responsible materials. These ideas excited younger employees, but they alarmed senior board members who had dedicated their careers to preserving the company's classic identity. Behind the polished image of a stable empire, a quiet struggle had been brewing. Detectives found evidence that Evelyn had anticipated resistance. Her journals contained notes about upcoming board discussions, concerns about internal sabotage, and descriptions of strained interactions with certain executives. She wrote carefully, avoiding emotional language, but the tension was unmistakable. Meetings had grown colder. Several proposals she introduced were rejected without fair consideration. Her assistant described subtle changes in her behavior: longer nights at the office, more guarded conversations, and unexplained moments of worry that she tried to hide behind professionalism. Everything took a darker turn when investigators discovered a set of anonymous letters hidden inside a locked drawer in her office. The messages were composed of clipped magazine letters, each warning her to stop pushing for change. The tone of the notes suggested someone who felt personally threatened by her vision. Evelyn had received the letters for nearly 6 months, yet she had told no one. Her decision to hide them appeared to come from fear of creating unnecessary panic or making the company vulnerable to scandal. She had always placed the empire above her own comfort, and this secrecy now became a crucial part of the investigation. Detectives analyzed the paper, glue, and magazine clippings. The materials were common and purchased from multiple stores, making them difficult to trace. But experts concluded that the writer understood the internal conflicts of the company well enough to weaponize them. The letters referenced specific projects only high-level employees would know about. This detail narrowed the suspect list considerably. Someone from the inside had been watching her. The investigation expanded into the personal histories of board members, senior managers, and former employees. Several individuals had motives ranging from professional resentment to financial disappointment. One supplier had recently lost a major contract after Evelyn introduced eco-friendly alternatives. A former executive had been removed due to unethical business practices and blamed Evelyn for it. Even relatives who rarely appeared at company events suddenly became subjects of interest. The empire's glossy reputation began to crack as police uncovered layers of greed, jealousy, and ambition beneath it. When detectives interviewed those closest to Evelyn, they learned she had once mentioned feeling like someone was following her. She never filed a report, likely hoping the issue would disappear if she ignored it. Instead, her silence allowed the threat to grow. A security expert found signs that someone had copied her entry codes weeks before her disappearance, possibly during a company event held at her home. This revelation shattered the idea that the intruder was an outsider. The person who had taken Evelyn had been close enough to blend into her daily life, close enough to observe her routines without raising suspicion. As all these details came together, investigators realized that Evelyn's disappearance was not a spontaneous act, but the culmination of long-term planning driven by deep resentment. Her ambition to modernize the company had not only divided the empire, but awakened someone willing to destroy her to preserve their own future. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Evelyn had been walking a dangerous path long before she vanished, and the threat she faced had been far more personal than anyone first believed. 5 days after Evelyn vanished, the investigation took a grim turn when a group of hikers reported a foul odor coming from an abandoned building on the edge of the city. The structure had once been a major manufacturing site for the Hart Empire before operations shifted to newer facilities. Over the years, it had become a forgotten shell, left to decay in silence. Police arrived quickly, expecting little more than vandalism or discarded waste. Instead, they found the scene that would change the direction of the entire case. Inside the factory, the air was thick with dust and old chemicals. Sunlight leaked through broken windows, forming sharp beams that revealed swirling particles in the air. Officers moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing across the empty space. Near the center of the main floor, beneath a collapsed wooden platform, they found Evelyn's remains. She appeared to have been placed intentionally rather than left in haste. The positioning suggested a message, though the meaning remained unclear. Forensic teams secured the area and began examining every detail. The absence of drag marks indicated she had been carried into the building. Her clothing showed no tears, no signs of defensive struggle, and no evidence of a violent confrontation inside the factory. This led experts to conclude that the crime had been carried out elsewhere, and the body moved afterward. Whoever orchestrated the act understood how to eliminate physical traces and avoid leaving immediate clues. Small fibers found on her clothing became one of the first significant pieces of evidence. They were identified as belonging to specialized gloves used in industrial woodworking, the same type worn in older Hart Empire workshops. The detail was striking because these gloves were no longer in general use, having been replaced by modern equipment years ago. Investigators realized the killer likely had access to stored company supplies or older operational areas. This discovery narrowed the suspect pool to those with knowledge of the Empire's history and facilities. Another unusual detail emerged when forensic experts detected traces of an outdated varnish formula on her jacket. The specific type had been discontinued decades earlier due to safety concerns. Only a few containers remained in obscure storage, mostly forgotten except by individuals who had worked with the company during its earlier years. Detectives theorized that the killer had deliberately used these materials to mislead the investigation or possibly out of attachment to the past. The abandoned factory itself offered few clues. Any footprints had been distorted by dust and time. No fingerprints appeared on nearby surfaces. The building's remote location meant there were no security cameras or regular patrols. It was the perfect place for someone who knew its isolation and lay out well enough to hide evidence without fear of interruption. The only clear sign left behind was a faint indentation on the floor near the body, as though the killer paused before leaving, perhaps reflecting on what had been done. News of the discovery spread rapidly, drawing intense media attention. Crowds gathered near police barricades, demanding answers. Protests formed outside the Hart Empire headquarters, accusing the company of hiding internal corruption. Employees feared for their safety, unsure if the killer still walked among them. The sudden exposure of Evelyn's fate shattered any remaining hope that she might be found alive. Detectives felt the pressure mounting as they sifted through new leads generated by the factory discovery. While the physical evidence was limited, the symbolism of the location and the nature of the materials used painted a clearer picture. Evelyn's death had not been impulsive. It had been carefully staged by someone who knew the Hart Empire's past intimately and wanted the crime tied to that forgotten history. The case, once clouded by uncertainty, was slowly revealing a pattern that pointed deeper into the heart of the company itself. The investigation took a dramatic turn when financial analysts reviewing the Hart Empire's archived legal documents uncovered a detail that had never been publicly mentioned. Evelyn Hart was not the sole heir to the company. Deep within old ownership agreements, tucked between outdated contracts and forgotten amendments, detectives discovered the name Marcus Hale. He was a distant relative on Evelyn's mother's side, someone the public never knew existed, and someone Evelyn herself had barely interacted with. The revelation stunned everyone involved, especially because the documents showed that Marcus had been granted legal rights to half the Hart Empire if anything happened to Evelyn. Marcus Hale was far from a familiar face within the company. For years he worked quietly in the shipping and restoration department, rarely drawing attention. He was the type of employee who blended into the environment so smoothly that many executives did not even know his name. But his personnel records revealed a troubled history: financial struggles, accumulating debts, and complaints about unpredictable behavior. He had been disciplined twice for aggressive outbursts, but always managed to keep his job by staying just below the threshold of termination. Detectives became more interested in Marcus after discovering that he had extensive experience in furniture restoration. He had been trained in older woodworking methods and frequently used outdated supplies. Investigators compared these details to the evidence found on Evelyn's remains, industrial glove fibers and varnish no longer used by the company. Marcus had access to both through restricted storage areas. The clues, once scattered, now aligned sharply around him. His co-workers described him as someone who felt overshadowed by Evelyn. He rarely spoke about her, but when he did, they sensed a simmering resentment. While Evelyn was celebrated in company newsletters and praised for her modern ideas, Marcus believed he represented the company's original craftsmanship. He viewed her planned changes as a threat to the legacy he admired. Detectives theorized that learning about his inheritance rights might have fueled an idea that he could gain both recognition and financial security if Evelyn were gone. The breakthrough came when officers searched Marcus's small apartment, located only a few miles from the abandoned factory where Evelyn's body had been found. Behind a loose brick in the bedroom wall, they discovered the collection of anonymous letters identical to those sent to Evelyn. The cut-out magazine letters matched the style and adhesive used in the warnings. Nearby, investigators found old cans of the discontinued varnish, industrial gloves with missing fibers, and a box of access cards that had been reported lost from company storage years earlier. In the corner of the room lay a stack of old blueprints showing layouts of Hart Empire facilities, including the abandoned factory. Several sheets were marked with circles, arrows, and handwritten notes. One particular blueprint outlined the interior structure of the factory where Evelyn's body was found, with an X drawn exactly where she had been placed. It was the closest thing to a direct link between Marcus and the crime scene. Detectives began reconstructing a possible motive. Marcus had likely discovered his inheritance rights while reviewing internal documents, or possibly through overhearing executive conversations. Facing mounting debt and convinced that Evelyn's leadership would destroy the version of the company he cherished, he saw a twisted opportunity. His knowledge of old facilities, outdated materials, and hidden company areas gave him the perfect toolkit to commit a crime that would blend past and present in a symbolic act of revenge. As investigators reviewed every piece of evidence, the picture became clearer. Marcus Hale was no longer just a quiet employee. He was now the prime suspect in a crime that reached into the deepest shadows of the Hart Empire, driven by jealousy, desperation, and an obsession with a legacy he felt slipping away. Marcus Hale's arrest was only the beginning of the final unraveling. Once he was taken into custody, investigators focused on piecing together the exact sequence of events that led to Evelyn Hart's death. The evidence found in his apartment, the financial motive, and his access to outdated company materials provided a strong foundation. But law enforcement wanted something more definitive. They feared releasing information without a full picture could leave unanswered questions or, worse, create doubt in court. The pressure was immense, and the city waited anxiously as the investigation entered its most critical stage. While reviewing the evidence again, detectives discovered a detail they initially overlooked in Marcus's basement, a large corkboard that displayed what appeared to be a timeline of Evelyn's daily routines. It contained lists, printed maps, handwritten notes, and photographs taken from a distance. The board documented her schedule down to the exact time she left her house, arrived at work, and returned home. It even included timeframes when her security system updated or when her assistants changed shifts. The level of organization made it clear that Marcus had been following her for months, planning every step meticulously. This was not a spontaneous crime, but a carefully orchestrated elimination. Experts reconstructed the path Marcus likely took on the morning Evelyn vanished. He had monitored her movements and identified a small gap in her security system during an update, a window of just a few minutes when internal cameras temporarily powered down. He used an old access card to enter the house without triggering alarms, moved straight to her office, and subdued her before she could react. Based on the absence of physical struggle, detectives concluded he had caught her by surprise. From there, he transported her in his vehicle using materials found in his warehouse, leaving no trace behind. Marcus's behavior after the crime also revealed important clues. He continued going to work, blending in seamlessly with employees, and never showed signs of panic. He even volunteered for charity events organized in Evelyn's name, staying close to the investigation but appearing cooperative. This allowed him to monitor the progress of the case and adapt if needed. His calm demeanor made him invisible when the police first began questioning staff, proving that his plan depended as much on patience as it did on preparation. The trial that followed revealed the depths of Marcus's resentment at the Hart Empire. He believed he deserved ownership because of his long service and connection to the company's roots. Evelyn's modern vision, in his mind, threatened the heritage he idolized. Rather than accepting a changing industry, he clung to the past. His justification revolved around a belief that she would destroy everything the company stood for. The abandoned factory where he placed her body became symbolic. He chose a location that represented old foundations, forgotten history, and the version of the empire he believed should remain untouched. Marcus was convicted on overwhelming evidence. Witnesses testified about his erratic behavior, financial desperation, and growing obsession with the company. The jury returned a verdict quickly, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom fell silent as the sentence was read, and for the first time Marcus showed emotion. The legacy he thought he could claim had cost him everything. In the aftermath, the Hart Empire took years to heal from the shock of losing its future leader. The board restructured operations, and new policies ensured that no single person could secretly gain control again. Evelyn's father honored her memory by establishing a foundation in her name, focusing on education and sustainable business practices, the very values she planned to bring into the company. Evelyn's story became a permanent reminder of how vulnerability can exist even in a world built on wealth and power. Beneath the polished surface of the empire lay hidden tensions that eventually consumed it. Her life proved that danger can come from the shadows of familiarity, and that the cost of ambition, jealousy, and silence can be far higher than anyone expects.